Okay, guys, we are doing, I am recording, we are doing vertex form of a parabola. So we're going to identify the vertex and axis of symmetry for each equation, and we just wrote down what vertex form is. Here's the equation, and then here's how it's related to what we know. Here's how you get the vertex and the axis of symmetry. So if we look at the first equation, here's how this is going to work. We want to complete the square with the x squared plus 2x part of the equation. The plus 3 is in the way. So we are going to move it. We are going to subtract 3 from both sides.
Why couldn't we just move it? Like, just tell it to go away.
Just tell it to go away, because mathematically we got to follow the rules. All right, so we moved 3 to the other side by subtracting it, and now I have x squared plus 2x. And we're going to use our process of completing the square. So you take 2, you divide by 2, which makes it 1, and then you square 1. So 1 times 1 is 1. So I'm going to add that to the end here. That is the number that completes the square. This is an equation today. So if I add 1 to the right side of the equal sign, I have to add 1 to the left side. So that's why this number is important. And so then I would just have y minus 2. And we can factor this. So it multiplies to make 1 and adds to make 2. So you could make your little x over here somewhere if you want to. Multiplies to make 1, adds to make 2. So it's 1 and 1. So you get x plus 1 squared. So that is the vertex form of the parabola. It doesn't actually say to do that in the directions, but we're going to circle that as one of our answers. And so we can get information out of the equation to find the vertex and the axis of symmetry. So the vertex is essentially, if you look at the original equation, it had minus signs. And so what that means is if you're going to need the opposite of these numbers. So I have plus 1 with the x, so we want to use minus 1. So we're finding the vertex. And so we're going to have minus 1 for the x value. And then I have minus 2 over here. And so I'm going to change that into positive 2. So it'll be the opposite of whatever's with the x and whatever's with the y. And remember that the x comes before the y in your vertex. So that's the vertex. And then the axis of symmetry, which I'm going to abbreviate AOS, would just be x equals negative 1. And we know that because the axis of symmetry goes through the vertex. And so this number and this number will always match up. So just to give you a brief idea of what this is really telling us, if I had a graph, I'm going to do a very simple graph. Simple. The vertex is at negative 1, 2, like this, and the axis of symmetry is through negative 1. And then I could tell just by looking at this, since the number in front of the x squared is positive, it would be positive 1, this would open up. And that would give me just some very basic information if I didn't need a perfect graph, but I just needed to know the vertex, the axis of symmetry. That would be the information that I could use. Okay? So we have other ways to get the axis of symmetry that we learned previously. This is another way, and it's another way to write the equation. Okay. So let's look at number 2. So our first step is to get the x squared minus 8x by itself so that we can complete the square. So we're going to subtract this 22 off both sides. That gets rid of it over here, and I'll have y minus 22. On this side, I have x squared minus 8x. Some people like to go ahead and put a plus blank so that it looks like the lesson where we can just completed the square. It's fine if you want to do that, because that's what we're going to do. We're going to take that negative 8. So I'll just do that out here to the side. We're going to divide it by 2 first. We get negative 4. And then we square that. So negative 4 times negative 4 is 16. And that's what I add on here. That is the value that completes the square. If I add 16 to this side, I also have to add 16 to this side just to keep the equation balanced. And so that gives me y minus 6, because negative 22 plus 16 is minus 6. So we'll just put minus 6 there. And then this we factor, and it multiplies to make 16, adds to make negative 8, which would be negative 4 and negative 4. Remember, we have that trick where that number always comes from this first step, so that can help you factor it, x minus 4 squared. All right, so that's my vertex form, and then we can use that to figure out what the vertex is in the axis of symmetry. So remember, we're going to use the opposites. So if this has -4, that means that H, which is the first part of your vertex, is just +4. If this part says -6, this is going to be +6. And so my vertex is at 4, 6. And then my axis of symmetry would be x equals 4, because it has to go through at 4. So if we think about what that would be in terms of the graph, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Just a simple little graph. We go over 4, up 6. We know this one opens up because the leading coefficient, the coefficient of the x squared term, is positive. So that goes up like this. And our axis of symmetry, I keep breaking my lead, the axis of symmetry would have to go right down through the middle, which would be 4. And you don't have to do the sketch. I'm just kind of explaining what kind of information this is giving us. What it's actually giving us, what this form of the equation actually gives us, is it explains transformations. This actually means, the vertex of a parabola, if it's just x squared, is 0, 0. That -4 moves it to the right 4, and that -6 moves it up 6, and so that's why it's over here now. Alrighty, let's take a look at number 3. So, first step is to subtract 34 from both sides. So we'll have y minus 34 equals x squared minus 10x. So we have this part over here that we can now complete the square. So we'll take the -10, divide it by 2, we get -5. If I take -5 times -5, I get 25. So I'm going to add that onto the end of this side, but if I add it to the right side, I also have to add it to the left side. That's where a lot of mistakes get made. People forget to do that part. So then if I add -34 and plus 25, I get -9, so that's -9 there. And then over here we factor this, multiplies to make 25, adds to make -10. So that'd be -5 and -5. Always the same number twice because we designed it that way. When you divide by 2 and square it, it makes this into a perfect square over here, which is what we want. And so we'll have x minus 5 squared, and that is the answer. Okay, so 1 through 3 were all basically the same. Oh, I guess we ought to go ahead and get our vertex and axis of symmetry. So what's the vertex on this one?
5, 9.
5, 9, good. And then the axis of symmetry would be x equals 5, good. Okay, so I'm going to throw some twists into 4, 5, and 6. Otherwise, there would be no point in doing 3 more because these were all basically the same. So when we get to number 4, it starts the same and then it changes. So we're going to get the minus 99 out of the way. So since it's minus, we're going to add this time. So add 99 to both sides. And that gives us y plus 99 equals -x squared plus 20x. You cannot complete the square while there's a negative sign in front of that x squared. It doesn't work. So what we're going to do is we're just going to factor a -1 out of both terms. So that's going to make this x squared on the inside. And then basically think, what would I take times -1 to get positive 20? Negative 20. So it becomes minus 20x. And I'm going to put a plus and a space in here to complete the square. And then over here it's still just y plus 99. All right, so you're going to complete the square inside these parentheses. So we take -20, we divide by 2, that gives us -10. -10 squared is -10 times -10, which gives us 100. So I'm going to put 100 here. Here's the part where you're going to probably forget sometimes to do it, and hopefully you'll remember because I'm trying to remind you now. We didn't actually add 100 to this side. We added 100 times -1. So that's actually like -100, right? So over here I need to subtract 100 or add -100, however you want to think about that, same thing. And so this becomes just y minus 1. Over here I have -1. and then we factor this that's in the parentheses. So it multiplies to make 100 and adds to make negative 20, so that'd be negative 10.
Negative 100.
So it is when you multiply it by the negative 1. But we still, as long as it's in the parentheses, what's in the parentheses is positive. It's just if I thought about distributing this out.
This stresses me out.
Okay, so we get negative 10 twice. So I'm going to have x minus 10 in here. And that is squared. Now this number right here is a. It's the same a that you have up here. This negative would be negative 1. When I put a negative in front of this, what does it do to your parabola when you graph?
Don't know.
It makes it frown upside down. So that means this is going to be opening this way. So that's the big change, is it opens upside down. So just realize, even if you have it in this form, if you have a negative out here, that tells you that the parabola opens down. We can also get the vertex from this. So what would be the vertex?
It would be, I don't know.
10 and 1. So if I have minus 10, I put positive 10. If I have minus 1, I put positive 1. So there's my vertex.
Yay.
And then my axis of symmetry
10.
would be x equals 10. You cannot just write 10, because remember, this is the equation of a vertical line. The x equals is what tells you that it goes up and down and not side to side.
Right.
So you got to have the x in there. The x is part of the answer. Okay, 5 and 6 are similar to 4, but instead of a negative, we're just going to have a number in front of the x squared, but the main process will be the same. Let's go down to number 5. So first, we're going to move the 53 to the other side. So y minus 53 equals 2x squared minus 20x. So I cannot complete the square with that 2 out there in front.
Why does
So you're gonna factor it out like that?
So we're just going to take a 2 out of both terms. So I'd have x squared, and then what would I do with the 20?
Plus 20.
Negative, how about negative 10x? Okay.
Because what?
Because 2 times 10 makes 20.
And then plus 1.
Why is it so difficult for me?
I don't know.
I don't understand.
It's Friday. Okay, so so we took a 2 out of both terms, and now I have just x squared, which is something that I can work with. And so we have negative 10 here. And if you look back, we actually did the work to complete the square with negative 10. Up here, we already know it's going to be plus 25. So if I add 25 here, am I actually adding 25?
You're really like,
No, you're multiplying by 2.
Okay, so multiply by 2, and that makes it 50. So I have to add 50 to this side, because the 2, if I distributed, would make that 50. So then I get y minus 3 and 2. And then over here, we're multiplying. Oh, I don't need to write that twice. Multiplying to make 25 and adding to make negative 10. We factored that one up here. It makes x minus 5 squared. So it repeated. So we get to benefit from that. Okay, so let me talk about what happens when we get a number out here to your parabola. We'll look into it more in depth later. Remember when we did lines, if you had a bigger number, it made a steeper slope. If you put a bigger number here, it makes the parabola more pointy and more up and down, and it makes it skinnier. So this would be a slightly skinnier parabola, which we'll get into more later, but that's what it does. It makes it steeper on the sides.
so would the
Okay.
vertex still be 5 or would it be 10?
So the vertex is still 5 and 3. It's always what's in the parentheses. So that's a good question. She's asking if the vertex is 5 or if it's 10, because I'd have to multiply. So it's actually still just the 5 that's in the parentheses, which is the point of the parentheses, is so that we can get that out of there. Good. And then the axis of symmetry would be x equals 5. Don't forget the x equals. We are almost done. We are almost done. Do you guys want to do 6 as your practice problem?
Yes.
Okay, let's call it good, and we'll do that for practice then.